Your game warden is a part of your community. Treat them as you would your neighbor. And, they're there to help you. They're there to make you successful. And they're there to stop the people that want to cheat.
We're all in it to, when we leave this agency and leave this earth, that there's still wildlife here in Pennsylvania for the future.
One of the things that's amazing about, the North American model of wildlife conservation is that, we share all the ownership of these animals. And when you have somebody going out and they're legitimately killing, taking more than they're entitled to, they're stealing from all of us.
Right. Hello again, and welcome to Call of the Outdoors, the podcast of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. It's that time of year. The leaves have probably almost dropped by now in most places. Still a lot of color here in central Pennsylvania, and it's the time of year that we're all looking forward to. And the shame of it is it goes too fast the older you get. And, the rut is upon us, and there's lots of people that we've gotten lots of pictures. Lots of people are successful out there in the field, whether it's deer or small game. And November is just a great month. But we also have a very exciting guest today. We have a brand new colonel of our law enforcement here in Pennsylvania at the Game Commission, Mr. Rod Danley. Good morning, Rod.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely, and we're excited about it. And we want to talk about a lot of things, and a lot of history about yourself, and some of the vision that you have here when you came into headquarters and leading the field of great men and women we have out there as game wardens that are out there every day protecting wildlife. And sometimes folks don't understand why there are game wardens, and we want to kind of get into that today. But before we do, Rod, let's talk about yourself and why you're here today.
Sure. I think like most of us in this agency, we kind of all have a passion for some sort of outdoors activity. And as a young person, as a young kid, I was into hunting and trapping. And, you think about that career path you're going to take, and it's like, well, doing something outdoors is probably something that I want to pursue, like being a biologist or a forester or something like that. Kind of as I got a little bit older, I started to realize that law enforcement was something I had an interest in, and being a game warden was kind of one of those driving, like, well, I can combine the biology aspect of it at the same time as kind of moving into a law enforcement realm. I think all of us have had experiences as well in our youth where you see somebody do something and you're like, boy, I wish somebody would be here to stop that. My personal experience was a fishing trout derby that I watched some guys doing some stuff as a young man that I was like, man, there should be a fish officer here to handle that. And that was really kind of my catalyst for wanting to move into this direction. And, I was originally looking at colleges to kind of pursue that. And there was a college fair at the convention center down in Philadelphia. And I was heart set on going to University of Alaska. That's where I wanted to go for wildlife biology. So as I was walking around all the booths, there was a little college from Maine called Unity College, and they had their little booth set up where they were giving out their brochures and handing that stuff around, and kind of walked up to them and said, what's your wildlife biology program like? And they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, ultimately I'd like to be a game warden. And they said, oh, we have a conservation law enforcement degree. So at the time, it was the only college in the country that had a 4-year bachelor's conservation law enforcement. So I went up there for 4 years, earned my degree in conservation law, and it was pretty much from there is what started me on the journey.
Maine's a terrible place to live.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
If you like the outdoors. But when let's talk about after those college days and how you got to the Game Commission here and what you had to do. When I look at the class that's in there right now, and even back years ago, there was a lot more people that applied for the class, and the competition was really stiff to get into the Russ Loeffler School.
Yeah, I tested in 1998, so got hired in 99. So I've been doing this 26 years now. But at the time, the competition, as you said, was quite a bit more rigid. And, I went into the testing process thinking that, well, this will be my first attempt at seeing if I could be successful, and we'll move on from there. Most people were telling me it would take 3 times to get in, and I was fortunate enough to luck into it my first time. And, at 23 years old, I started the academy in 1999. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. You go from a college atmosphere to a academy, and our academy is paramilitary, as you know. it was a bit of a shocking experience to understand that I had to polish my boots and make my bed and be where they tell me to be when they need me to be there. It was a bit of a transition. But yeah, that was my original avenue to get here. And then, upon graduation, I was assigned to central headquarters here in Harrisburg, where I worked for 5 years in our investigative section. So it was our special investigative section. So I did that for the first 5 years of my career, which was exciting.
We're gonna talk about that a little later for sure.
After that, I had wanted to wanted a district over in central Pennsylvania, specifically in Huntington County, which is where half of my family was from. And I waited for the warden there, John Roller, to retire. And when he finally retired, I transferred into that position and spent additional 5 years there. And then promoted into the Huntington headquarters, or the division headquarters, as they used to call them. Now they're the regional offices. But I went in there and served as the information education supervisor for about 6 months until the law enforcement supervisor position opened up, and I had that position since 2012.
Oh wow! So we work with the IESs quite a bit in our bureau, and one thing that happens with game wardens or across the state that folks don't realize is they're tasked with a lot of duties. When you said earlier about like being a biologist, they assist the biologist. I mean, law enforcement's one part of it, but the game wardens across the state, they're our first folks that people see with the agency a lot of times, whether it's at a gas station, a restaurant, in the field, or whatever. And they're always trying to provide that information to folks that they need. I mean, we have to admit that, when you open our law book, there's lots of laws out there. The digest is a snippet of what the game laws are, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. And you take that oath to enforce those laws on behalf of the agency and on behalf of the state, and that's one of your jobs. But there's the game warden's jobs are so entailed with lots of different things, and one of the things I say this all the time, being from the outside in the last 6 years, I've learned so much about the duties and tasks, but the brotherhood and sisterhood that game wardens have is pretty amazing in our agency, and we're all in it to, when we leave this agency and leave this earth, that there's still wildlife here in Pennsylvania for the future, and I think that's one of the most important role that we have to do as employees of the agency, in my opinion.
Definitely. I think one of the things that we all do in this agency that is very interesting is that we generally come here because we have a passion for wildlife, whether that be just wildlife viewing or whether it be hunting, fur taking. And then we have to kind of set that on a shelf when we come here, because this career path interferes with your ability to do those things. You have, if you want to go deer hunting as a game warden, you're going to have to go out there and check deer hunters. So that limits your opportunities to do that. So I think everybody who works here sacrifices a little bit.
Sure.
Which makes it a very noble endeavor, because all the guys that work our bear check stations, all the folks that are out there checking deer heads at butcher shops, they all could be doing what they really want to do, which is get after white-tailed deer, if that's the case. So it takes a special type of person that does what we do as a group. Game wardens, obviously, as you said, they are the ones that get tasked with having to explain why we do what we do most often. Whether that be at a gas station or in a public venue where they stand up and talk to people. But they're just one part of what we do.
Sure.
There's so many other employees that work here. And I'm proud to say that, our game wardens do an excellent job of representing our agency.
Absolutely.
The law can be complicated. The law can be misunderstood. Clearly, there are people that don't care what the law says. They'll do whatever they want to do irrespective of it. And that's why we're here, to kind of stop those people from exploiting our resources.
Right. When you think about that too, and maybe kind of talk about why we do have game wardens. Obviously in 1895, when the agency was established, it was very important, because without enforcing those laws, wildlife wouldn't have a chance.
Right. I think it's really important too to keep in mind that the Pennsylvania Game Commission was created by the sportsmen and women of Pennsylvania. They wanted a governing body that would manage wildlife in a way that would continue to have wildlife available for them to hunt and to trap. So laws were created back then, but without an enforcement arm and the ability to actually stop people or make people follow the law, it was almost impossible. So laws were originally created within the first couple of years, but the game wardens weren't present yet to be able to actually enforce it. And I think that's really an interesting dynamic when you think about it was the hunters and trappers in Pennsylvania that wanted us to exist. And here we are today, by proxy doing their bidding, asking what do you want, how many animals do you think are fair to be harvested, and we enforce those laws as the regulations require.
Right, and keeping our folks safe out there in the field. I mean, that's a whole nother caveat of, it's not that we're trying to say this is how you have to do it. We're trying to, keep people safe and enjoying that recreation that they love out there. And, it's a big job. It definitely is a big job. But talk about, kind of circle back to your outdoor passions, and everybody, we're so diverse in this agency. Most people love to hunt, trap, fish, hike, whatever it is, but we all have that passion for the outdoors. And what are some of your personal passions?
Well, interestingly enough, I was interested in deer hunting, like most of us, pheasant hunting, like most of us. And so when I went to my first hunter education class, I sat in there, and it was quite different than it is today, but there was a whole section on trapping, where they showed you how to make sets and fox sets and raccoon sets. And I was enthralled with the fact that this guy was burying a trap in the dirt. I thought you just set them on the ground and an animal would walk into them, but I had no idea the science behind it. So after that hunter ed class, I started thinking this might be something I'd like to do. So the bug that bit me initially was fur taking, trapping. And, I spent a lot of time raccoon trapping and fox trapping. Having grown up in southeastern PA, we have one of the best red fox populations probably in the country.
One of the last strongholds, really, of a thriving population.
And the first animal I ever caught in a foot trap was, in fact, a red fox. A lot of guys talk about possums and whatnot, but
you went right for the top.
Just luck. But yeah, it was a red fox, and I had no idea what I was doing. And because I didn't know what I was doing, I violated an awful lot of laws while I was doing it. You can go down the list. It was pretty much everything you could violate, and but it bit me, and I was a fur taker, during that entire time. Squirrel hunting, small game hunting, all that kind of stuff. But my time in Maine kind of got bit by the waterfowl bug, and there's a lot of water up there. The duck hunting is amazing. So coming back down here, I brought that passion with me, and over the past probably 5 years, that's been where I spend most of my time is pursuing waterfowl, in any mechanism I can, any manner, whether it be a blind or a boat, whatever it may be. But that's really what I like to do with my time now.
That's like I always say, to each their own. As long as we're out there, and as a hunter, we're conservationists, and we're just providing and helping the future, no matter where we're at. If you're a waterfowl hunter or a squirrel hunter, or let's just hit on trapping real quick, because I think it's important. And in our day, trapping was a lot bigger. Obviously you could fill your gas tank and make a little money, with the prices of furs back then. But I always said this, one of my mentors in the outdoor industry, especially on the outdoor TV side, was Tom Miranda. I'm sure you know Tom. Tom, I was in Florida one time, and we were talking about how, he got his start in trapping. And I always say this, anybody that can make a fox or a coyote step on a 2.5-inch pan and target that to make that animal come in there and catch him and hold him or her, that's what hunting is all about too, like deer hunting or turkey hunting, is put yourself in those positions that, if you're hunting bucks, a buck or a doe was going to walk by you, or a turkey calling it in, and, putting yourself in those positions, the same as a trapper. But, Pennsylvania coyotes are probably one of the toughest things to catch. And if you had one tip that you could give to somebody that's trying to catch a coyote this fall or this winter, would you have one off the top? And I know I'm hitting you.
Yeah, don't overthink it.
Right.
Keep it simple. A lot of the new coyote trappers or people that haven't had success tend to overthink what they're doing. Most of the successes that I've had, and most of the guys who proficiently catch coyotes in numbers, are usually keeping a very simple system. Everything is essentially the same, and what they're doing isn't very much different than maybe a fox set or a raccoon set in a dirt hole on the ground. It's just keep it simple. Scent is one of those things that we hear about with hunting, but in fur taking, obviously that's a huge issue. But don't for a second think that these animals don't smell humans every day. They know that you've been there, so don't worry about that as much. Make your set solid, bed it, and don't let anything rock, and you'll have success, especially with coyotes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, there's so many tips and tricks and tactics. And I love what you said about not overthinking. I don't care if it's whitetails or turkeys or whatever we're talking about. We're the only animal that can think and reason and figure out a situation. And sometimes we forget about that. Right. We're out there. Those animals are surviving. They're out there. And when you do overthink it, is a lot of times when we make mistakes. And speaking of overthinking it, I'm just going to break real quick and talk about something that's happening right now. We're first week of November. It is, for lack of a better word, Santa Claus is here. The rut is on. And, a lot of times we are in a grind where after we get in, today's technology, we're getting trail cameras and we're thinking, what's going on? Those animals out there are being animals. Put yourself in the right positions, put the wind in your favor to the best of your ability. Those deer are living every day by their nose. Utilize technology like calls. That's when if you're hunting bucks or bigger bucks, this is when they lose their minds because they're in breeding season. They're trying to find those does. If you can use the wind to your advantage, obviously preseason scouting, know where to be and hunt smart. Hunt when the times are right. It's not necessarily how much you get out there and how much time you spend out there. It's hunting out there at the right times. And this is the best time of year for whitetail hunters. It's when we're all out there as archery hunters, and especially this, from here until firearm season. It's just a great time to be in the woods, and we can't say enough about it. And we wish everybody out there to be safe. But one thing I do want to say, if you're getting off the ground, I don't care if it's a foot off the ground, make sure you're strapped to the tree. Just this year we've had a couple of related accidents to tree stands and tree stand failures, and we also have a lot of success stories because people are listening to the world right now. Is when they get off the ground, they're strapping in the whole way up to that tree stand. But enjoy yourself out there, and like I said, this is the best time of year to chase whitetails, in my opinion. And it's just like turkey season. We get in there to spring turkey season. They're in their mating season. When that gobbler gobbles, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and it's passion just like trapping when you see a set of coyote tracks. But one thing that we have to do together, whether you're a hunter, whether we're in the marketing bureau here at the Game Commission or a law enforcement agency, we all have to work together for the future. Right. And as we look at the world today, and we can go down so many rabbit holes, but in my opinion, hunters and no matter what, we need to work together. We need to erase those division lines and stop infighting about dumb things. But talk about how we like to work together as game wardens with the public, and how we can probably do better as we go forward.
Yeah, I think was always a reputation that game wardens had of being that kind of curmudgeon-y person who was kind of hard and unyielding when it came to understanding.
And they get nicknames, and I'm sure you've heard them all.
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, and some of us hold those nicknames with a badge of honor. But the reality is that we're out there to enforce the law, and one of the things that I like to tell the public about that is that most of everyone that we deal with are good people that are trying to follow the rules and have a good day afield. But there's always that percentage of people, no different than a general population, that are just not going to follow the rules, whether that be a criminal in a city somewhere or a town, or whether it be just a hunter. There's always that small percentage of people that you have to be cognizant of, and also that's our job to stop them from doing it, because they know what they're doing, and they don't necessarily care that we have rules and regulations. And one of the things that's amazing about the North American model of wildlife conservation is that we share all the ownership of these animals, and we often hear about your deer, the Game Commission's deer eating my crops, or Game Commission's deer eating my hedges. Yeah, I guess you can perceive it that way, but they're actually everyone's deer. And when you have somebody going out and they're legitimately taking more than they're entitled to, they're stealing from all of us. Right. Every one of us that purchases a license, but also every one of us that is a resident of our state, And that's really the type of people that the game wardens are focusing their efforts on. But it's hard for a game warden to know, who that individual is when they make the initial approach. They don't know whether this individual is a habitual violator versus somebody that is just out completely legal. And, so we go through our checks, we ask for their licenses, we make sure that their firearms are safe. And that can be a little confrontational, so, we can do better. And I think we are. Our wardens do an excellent job of building a rapport with people and speaking with them. But hunters also need to understand that, hey, I'm out here hunting and I may get checked today. And if I do, it's not a big deal. The warden's going to make sure I'm good and move me on down the road so I can be successful today. A lot of times that's kind of lost in translation.
Right. Understood.
And I think it's important that, we all continue to move in that direction of like, hey, if you see a game warden, he's not necessarily here to write fines. He or she is most likely going to want to see what you harvested because, as I said earlier, we're interested in what guys are shooting and harvesting as well because, that's where our passions lie. I know quite often I've been excited for a young kid that harvested his or her first deer, and the interaction is absolutely just having a conversation about congratulations, good job. Sometimes those turn into something else when you find out that, the individual didn't have a license or, their firearms loaded in their vehicle, something like that. And then that gets addressed accordingly. But that's not the original reason we were there. We're there to, pat them on the back and shake hands with them and say, good job. But, so these interactions that we do as game wardens are very fluid. They go from very simple to, very complex.
Right.
But I could tell you that most of the men and women that do this job, we're out there looking for the habitual violators that are doing serious damage to our resource because there are those people out there. And every time that we've had encounters with those people, every time we have arrested or cited people for those things, it's based on information that other people have told us, mainly other hunters. And I think that's an important relationship that needs to remain because there's only one officer in a very large area geographically. But there's lots of hunters that are out there seeing what's going on, whether it's somebody doing something illegal with a baiting scenario or whether it's somebody who is harvesting a second buck. All of that kind of stuff is super important. And those relationships exist. They may not be publicized very much, but a warden who has a district that's effective has built those relationships to know who's doing what and why and where it's being done.
Yeah, and you look at the OGT program, Operation Game Thief. It's an anonymous program.
Mm-hmm.
You see something going on, you can give us a call on the hotline, and that's been a very effective program here in the state because, like you said, when somebody is stealing, they're stealing from all of us.
Correct.
And our limits and are getting very liberal when you look at you can go have fun. We're encouraging folks to harvest antlerless deer in a lot of areas. As we look at hunting numbers in the last 30 years, we're at just shy of 900,000 people that do buy a hunting license and partake every fall. But when you look at our deer population, there's a lot of areas that we do need to work on numbers, places where we can't grow new forests and agriculture areas like the Southwest, this year when our pilot program was Certified Hunter, trying to help out some of the folks that are making a living with agriculture. Hunting is important when it comes to managing those populations. And what I respect the most about game wardens, I used to travel the country and be able to hunt in a lot of different states. And usually the first call I made when I got to camp was the local game warden because I wanted to become friends with him. I wanted him to know we were in town. Yeah. And I wanted to talk to him and show him my license and all that stuff. And if I needed, and many times I called them for help, a lot, especially on recoveries, because I wanted people to know that it was legit. And sometimes they took us up on it. And I made a lot of great friends that way. And what I've experienced across this, not only Pennsylvania, but across the country, that how much game wardens care. Many folks don't see that when they get checked. Right. They think that it's, they're just trying to catch you with something. And this is off the wall a little bit, but the other night, my daughter and I were coming home from a dirt track race, and we went through a DUI checkpoint. And the officer was he was awesome. He asked us a lot of questions. We didn't have any alcoholic drinks, but he asked us who won the race. I mean, and was just questioning us. And I kind of joked around with him. And my daughter had a turkey feather, and we got to talking about hunting in the middle of a DUI checkpoint. But they're just doing their job, and that's what our game wardens are doing out there. They're doing their job to protect wildlife and why we exist as an agency.
Correct.
To make sure that just following our mission.
I think it's interesting as well, to a point you just brought up, where you have game wardens generally know their districts pretty well. So if you're a hunter and you're new to the area, you can ask them, is there landowners that are having problems with deer and want more deer removed? They open doors sometimes that you wouldn't normally have had open to you. If you're going and hunting public land, that's fine, perfectly great. And again, we're blessed with an amazing amount of public land in this state. But a game warden can give you a hyper focus, especially as we get more liberal bag limits and we have more opportunities for harvest. There's people that they can direct you to, and I think hunters should kind of take that into account.
Absolutely.
So is there anybody out there that's looking for some more deer to be taken off their farm or off their nursery or whatever the case may be? And I think they can make those connections pretty solidly.
Even advice on game lands, because they know those game lands in their district like the back of their hand. They might know where there's a timber sale or something where there's some really good habitat that you might not be able to see on OnX be their friends, be friends with each other, create those networking relationships.
Especially important with bear hunting, because usually the game wardens know where they put the bears on the game lands, and they also know where they're doing the research trapping. So they generally have a good knowledge of bear populations on public lands. It's amazing what they know if you ask.
Or where there's a good oak stand that's dropping acorns, and there's just so much. And let's just circle back on that a little bit. Let's say especially new hunters too. That like you said, it can be very intimidating when you're approached by an officer. Do you have any good advice for a hunter out there any time of the year when they get approached by a game warden?
Well, I think the advice that I would offer is that just realize that it's not necessarily going to be a bad interaction, but you can make it a bad interaction, and game wardens are often mirrors of what behavior they see, and it comes back to them and they reflect it back to the individual. So, if you have an enthusiastic check, and this happens a lot. I'm not trying to say that all these interactions are bad. They're not. But there's been times where I've been with game wardens in their new districts, and the hunter would say, it's the first time I've ever been checked by a game warden. I've been hunting for 35 years. It's an experience for them. It's a big, like a checklist almost, like a bucket list thing. Those are the good experiences. But keeping that attitude, having that attitude to say, like, this can be a positive encounter, is probably what I would recommend for the hunter. Don't look at it as being a negative thing.
Just working together.
Yeah. I mean, we don't like to hold up a deer drive, and you've got 25 people that are assembled in a parking area getting ready to push off a ridge, and you've got to check their licenses. It's like, I understand you guys want to get in your positions. Let's get you all checked to make sure you can get out of here as quick as possible. And they will. The wardens will accommodate that, but they have to do their job. They're going to go through all the checks and make sure that the firearms are good and the orange requirements are good, licensing is good. But they're well aware of the fact that you've got something to do. You guys are all off of work today, and you want to push this ridge off. Let's get you going. So I would offer for hunters just to keep an open mind when they have those encounters and embrace the experience. It might be a story for camp later that night.
Absolutely. And you said earlier, in your first trapping endeavors, there was probably some violations. And I don't think anybody in the agency, in the country, that doesn't break a violation sometime in their career. Yeah. I mean, it happens. Like you said, you're more looking for the habitual. But, the biggest thing that I always tell folks, especially, younger folks, is if you think it's wrong, just don't do no deer, no turkey, no bear, no squirrel. Mm-hmm. Nothing's worth breaking the law for. If you think that there's something that's not right, and, obviously you can look at the digest. There's so many resources, online resources. If you think it's not right, just don't do it. I mean, It's really simple. It's just like speeding. Everybody drives over the speed limit. It's not right. If you get pulled over, there's no reason to argue with the officer because you were speeding. I mean, it's just how it is.
I think too, hunting is a little different in when we use those analogies about, speeding and things like that. But hunting's a little different in the sense that you can do everything 100% correct and still violate the law. You can look at a set of antlers on a deer and think you counted the legal amount of points and still harvest a deer that's not legal. You can set a beaver trap and catch an otter. You didn't do anything wrong. The circumstances were just didn't line up in your favor. But we have mechanisms for that. And I think it's important for everybody to know that. We understand that these things happen. So when they do, call us. We're going to work through it. Every year we get non-target catches in traps that was no fault of the trapper. And every year we've got someone who shoots a deer and maybe the bullet goes through and kills another deer behind it. No fault of the hunter.
Right.
And we understand that, and we want to work with everybody to kind of move them along so they can continue to hunt that day or that season. But really it's about communication, because when that game warden later finds that deer or an extra deer, stowed away in a truck under a tarp, well, it's going to be hard to explain that, well, I made a mistake or I did something I didn't mean to do, because now it looks like you're trying to hide it. So just getting on that cell phone, making the assumption that you're in an area where a cell phone works, and making that call and saying, hey, like, this is what happened, that goes a long way to kind of correcting some of that. And I think that's the beauty of Title 34, where we recognize that people do things that are wrong, but they didn't intend
right.
to. So we've built kind of safeguards into it so that we can address these things.
It's a lot better to own it right out of the gate.
Always.
And in anything in life, but especially when you look at, because we all make mistakes. We all put our pants on the same way. Sound like my grandpa. And we all do different things for a living, but we're all the same. And the more honest and take ownership in mistakes, the better we all would be in life. And when I look at hunters, I think we've come a long way. When I look at my past of people that have formed a relationship with their local wardens or with the agency, I think when we look at Pennsylvania as a whole, we've came a long way in the past 20, 25 years.
I agree. We work much closer with our hunters today than I think we did originally.
Yeah, and and you look at technology and how we can communicate with the hunters, whether it's websites, social media, news there's so many ways that we can communicate and get those communications out there to the public. And, going back to kind of hitting on communications, and I think we should talk about why there are game laws. And you mentioned Title 34, and kind of explain what Title 34 is, because we hear that a lot.
Right.
Internally, most people understand that, but when we get outside of our walls, Title 34 is just a word to most people.
Sure. And the easiest way to explain it is that Title 34 is the Game and Wildlife Code, which is the law that was enacted by our state legislature and approved through the entire vetting process that occurs with creating laws, and establishes the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Title 34 is what says the Game Commission can do what the Game Commission can do, from the number of commissioners that we're allowed to have to the safety material that's required, what is considered lawful versus not lawful, what a farmer can do for agricultural depredation, what a individual can do for protecting their home from wildlife. It's all codified, down to how much money can be charged per acre of game lands for taxes. All of that is broken down in the law. That requires a legislative action to change. And some of the stuff that we see with legislative action, the big one lately, is obviously Sunday hunting. In the law, it was prohibited. When that was written many, many, many years ago, Pennsylvania legislator and the hunters did not want Sunday hunting, and that had to be changed. On the other side of that, we have regulations, which are Title 58. So you'll hear game wardens talk about a Title 58 or a Title 34 violation. There's violations in both of those. But 58 allows our Board of Commissioners to manipulate mechanisms and take and devices that the law would not allow. So as an example, I always explain this in my classes in Hunter Ed, there is no season date in Title 34. And so the opening day of deer season, whatever day that happens to be, isn't in the law. It has to be done through the regulations. And if we waited for the legislature to do that, that process takes so long that the season would be over by the time the law got approved.
Maybe 3 years.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
So So the regulations allow the board of commissioners to say, okay, this is when it's going to start next year, and this is how many animals are going to be able to be taken based on the research that we've provided, or biologists have provided to us. All of that kind of stuff can be changed. The one big thing with game wardens and also the public that's in there is legality of devices. So every year we have the sports show, the Great American Outdoor Sports Show. What is it called now? Is it
It's the Great American Outdoor Show. NRA show.
I always get confused.
Used to be the Sportsman Show forever.
Yeah, it's changed a couple times.
It is the biggest one in the country. I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah, it's amazing. But every year they have new devices for sale. And the law doesn't necessarily incorporate those devices because they weren't even thought of. And I think that's kind of important for most hunters to know. The way our regulations are, the Board of Commissioners have to approve the device as legal before it can be used. And I think it was several years ago, many, many moons ago, and I don't want to be disparaging to any one company, but there was a broadhead that was being sold there that had like a 357 bullet in the head, so that when the arrow hit, it would discharge the 357 round. And the proprietor was saying, well, they're legal in Pennsylvania. Well, they clearly were not. and that's something that hunters need to understand, that like, I'm buying a new device. Better check before I buy it, make sure it's legal. And, as a general rule, if it's electronic and it doesn't have approval by the board, then it's prohibited.
Right.
As a waterfowl hunter in Pennsylvania, until they allowed for mojo ducks, they were illegal. You could not hunt with a motion activated decoy because it was an unapproved electronic device. That's since changed, but always stay up on top of that. So the difference between the regulations are that they're much more fluid and much more topical, and the title is much more rigid and much more structured as it goes to how we function and what we can and can't do. All the game warden's powers and duties are all within the title. But on the other side of it, regulations can clarify some of that. An interesting thing that I think is fascinating, we talked about coyotes earlier, is that, we really don't define coyotes in our title. So, definitions in Title 34 are super important, and we break everything down: big game, small game, fur bearers. Coyotes are kind of not present in that. And why is that? Because we didn't have them in Pennsylvania in 1895 when the codes were written.
The population changes, yeah.
So now they're in regulations. We define it in regulations, which allows us to say, okay, they're fur bearers as defined by Title 34, and you can harvest them accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talked about, and this is a great point, and it kind of rang a bell in my head because I came from the hunting industry, and the hunting industry is always trying to find a new way to be more proficient. And sometimes products hit the market and they're great products. And, and that's why I encourage like industry all the time. When we do industry shows, trade shows, I'm like, you have to get with the wildlife agencies, because if we don't know what's coming, it takes us time to get those things. You look at today's technology and broadheads and arrows, and look at shotgun shells, look at like turkey ammunition, waterfowl ammunition, even rifle ammunition. Like there's so much that technology is day to day and through the state processes, and what we have to do if we're up on that stuff, other than reading it, when we form those relationships with the industries, I would recommend to all industry out there to talk to their agencies and talk to their law enforcement partners when those products come out. That's a great idea. It's something that we should probably talk about, throughout the country when we go to these trade shows.
And not trying to inflate our egos in Pennsylvania too much, but we have a large hunting constituency that goes all over the country and purchases a lot of outdoor gear. Kind of bouncing it off of us would be pretty important, because we have a lot of people that are potentially going to buy it. I mean, I think we are like number 2 in the amount of hunters in the country.
We are. When you talk to the outdoor industry, I mean, we have the number 1 brick and mortar hunting, fishing, outdoor related store sitting in Hamburg with Cabela's. I mean, and you talk to a lot of the outdoor industry throughout the country, and Pennsylvania is their number 1 ship to state. Our sportsmen buy a lot of gear out there, and partly of how we're funded, through the Pittman Robertson dollars with guns, ammo, guns and ammunition, and archery equipment. It's part of wildlife conservation funding, and we're very fortunate and lucky to have that tradition, that passion of hunters out there. Exactly right.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
We can't count Texas as number 1. There's a whole country down there. I always tease, but to still remain in the top, 4 or 5 as number 2 of hunters in the country in this day and age is pretty amazing. And when I look at numbers this year, I just got a report the other day on hunting license sold. We're flattening the curve. We're staying pretty level with the last 7-8 years of licensed hunters.
I noticed that.
Yeah, and it's great
encouraging.
news. Yeah, it is
very encouraging. One of the things too hunters need to know about the laws, and I think it plays a little bit into technology, is that the laws are written essentially for 2 purposes. One is for safety, and the other is for fair chase. So, those who don't know what fair chase is, that's the ability to pursue wildlife in a manner that we, as the citizenry of Pennsylvania, feel is okay. That's why in our state there are certain activities that are prohibited because we, as a citizenry, say, no, we don't like that. We don't think it's fair. Perfect example is Sunday hunting. We didn't want it. Now we have it, which is great because it gives everybody an opportunity to get an extra day, especially those that work. But that attitude changed. So you have that fair chase idea of what is considered fair. And then we have safety. So a lot of the other rules and regulations are about what you can't do because it's unsafe. Shooting close to a home, having a loaded firearm in your car. These are things where we see people get hurt. We see damage to property. And most of the device interpretations, so the new hunting gear falls on fair chase. Does this make it easier for the hunter to harvest animals? And if it does, are we okay with that? And I think that's really important to take into context because some of the things, if they're safety oriented, usually aren't really debatable. A tree stand harness doesn't need to be discussed. It makes a person safer. But whether you have an electronic trigger in your rifle, is that something that makes you more effective as a hunter? So it's that fair chase and safety are the 2 main aspects of Title 34 as well as Title 58. And that's where we spend an awful lot of our time with regulations.
I can't imagine that 357 bullet in the end of an arrow is too safe. That scares me. It's concerning.
It was marketed for hog hunting
down
south, but it was crazy.
Yeah, that's one thing we never want here is wild hogs.
No.
People, I hear that all the time, and I've spent a lot of time in the Southwest, and they think deer and elk create crop damage. Hogs are the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. But, you talked about the Sunday hunting bill and now legal. One of the things that came with Sunday hunting on that bill was a little bit different and higher trespass laws. Can we talk about that while we're here
Sure.
a little bit? And because I want the folks that are listening to understand that, we're taking trespass seriously.
Well, we always had taken trespass seriously, but in my career, we kind of spanned the gamut from we didn't really enforce trespass. It was more of a state police or local police matter, where we've pivoted to trespassing now as being something that we do enforce. And I think it's also very important for the hunting public to know that if you trespass and harvest game, even though that game is lawfully taken, meaning you tagged it, you shot it outside of a safety zone or whatever, if you are trespassing when that happens, that game becomes unlawful. That's a game changer for a lot of folks out there that are trespassing on these properties. So it's imperative that we, as a hunter, know where we are, because you could be 100% okay, but if that landowner takes exception with you being there, what you harvested is now becoming an unlawful deer, and potentially you could lose your license for harvesting that deer. But the Sunday hunting bill really just tied in the fact that we want to elevate chronic trespassers. It gave a little more teeth, if you will, to our trespassing our trespassing enforcement. I think that one was created through the state legislature, and we haven't really had the time to see how that increased trespassing is going to really apply, because this is the first year that we're moving into it. But I think it's definitely a message sent that, one, the Pennsylvania Game Commission takes trespassing seriously, but additionally, our state legislator takes it seriously, and the rights of private property are important. And if an individual goes out and posts their property, people should be paying attention to that. And I think that's legitimate.
I do too. And with today's technology, again, whether it's handheld applications on your phone, the internet, I mean, finding out where you are is pretty easy. I say that to folks all the time. Know where you're at. Ask permission.
Sure.
Worst thing they can say is no.
No, exactly.
And you might form a bond. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen it happen where, you get down and talk to your neighbor and they don't want you to hunt. And then 3 years later they say, hey, you know what? I thought about this. Those relationships are vital. And, we've always been a state. You look at other states, the way that trespasses, you get in the southern part of the United States, you're going to jail in a lot of places for trespassing, and not, especially with a firearm and hunting. And like you said, you can do everything right, but when it becomes an illegal deer, you might be sitting out a few seasons if you're not careful. But one of the confusions too that happens, it's happened here in the last couple of weeks, are fluorescent orange regulations. And while we had you here, I wanted to talk about that, and it goes all over the place. You look at social and people. To me, there's a little bit of leeway where you can get confused, but as a bow hunter, archery hunter, in an archery season, you do not have to wear fluorescent orange, even when they overlap with a muzzleloader and like the special firearms. Am I correct when I say that? I mean, it's recommended, but it's not the law.
Correct. And honestly, just like the sporting community, our orange regulations have changed so much over the years, and you'll see a lot of confusion as it relates to what you can and can't do. If you recall, 15 years ago during the inline season, as it overlapped with the archery season, what the orange requirements were, we would get a lot of confusion there. So I think they've been simplified quite a bit to make it much more effective for hunters to understand what their orange requirements are. But honestly, game wardens have to look at the book just the same to say, all right, what orange am I wearing today? Because this is a new paradigm, if you will, and it changes back and forth. I think some of the younger wardens and also our younger hunters don't have that bias because they didn't grow up in that time when we had all the had to wear an orange hat when you were moving about during archery season, and then you could take it off, and that's been.
I remember when you had to wear it in turkey season in the spring.
Yeah.
The big thing is look at the book.
Exactly.
But when there are folks out there with firearms, it's not a bad idea to carry some orange with you.
Yeah, as a waterfowl hunter, I am always a little concerned about that because waterfowl hunters don't have to wear fluorescent orange. So you're sneaking into your stand or your duck blind sometime in the in the early morning hours if it's during deer season. I've always never liked that idea. Orange is always an awesome idea, no matter what you're doing. So is a tree stand, harness, and one of the things you touched on earlier. Try to stay out. This is especially for young hunters. Stay out of old tree stands. Like, as a kid, I used to climb up on them all the time and hunt out of them. I figured nobody's here today. But those ones you see built in the woods that are out of 2x4s and plywood, those are dangerous. And they break all the time. So stay out of them because we don't want to have to come scoop you up after you fall down and break a pelvis or a leg or whatever the case may be. We really don't want to be doing that, especially during the busy hunting seasons when we're trying to get out there and check as many hunters and respond to as many incidents as we possibly can. If somebody falls, we're going to come and help them. But that's a time-consuming matter. So stay out of those old.
Right. Even manufactured tree stands, if they've been hanging there for a while, when they rust, bolts rust, cables. The latest one I just saw, and I've been seeing this on social in a lot of places. People leaving their stands out there, and the cables, like wherever they're connected to the stand just falls apart when they get in it. And make sure you check your stuff before you get up there. Anytime it doesn't take 20 feet to hurt something. You can fall 4 feet and break your neck. I mean, it doesn't take that much. But when we look at the vision, Rod, and for you as the colonel and leading the agency's law enforcement efforts, for the next 5-10 years, do you have any vision on things that you want to see that's a passion of yours as you take this agency's law enforcement efforts to the level or the vision that you're looking at? That's a deep question, I know.
There's a lot of layers to that onion. First thing I would say is that I'm super honored to be in this position. The men and women that are game wardens in Pennsylvania are some of the finest, well, not some, they are the finest conservation officers in the country. I've never seen more dedicated and driven individuals than the people that work for us. I really am humbled to be able to say that I'm the colonel of this agency, and it's overwhelming to be able to say that. And I really, really appreciate how much these men and women bring to the table. They do it every day. They get up and they drive forward. They go out there when it's snowing and icy. They stand along the side of an interstate with semis blowing by because they have to put down an injured deer. They go on rescues and reunite families. I'm honored and awestruck to be sitting here to say that I'm the colonel of them. So yes, that's the first thing that I wanted to say regarding that. I do have ideas. That the question is, as I said, there's a lot of levels to that, a lot of layers to that. I want to hear from the game wardens here as to what their needs are, what areas they think we can improve upon. When you take a new job, you don't want to come in and change everything. You want to sit back and observe and say, let me see how everything works and how the sausage is made, and then figure out whether or not we want to change the recipe. And right now, having this position for under a month, I don't know even what's in the recipe, let alone what needs to be changed.
And just for the record, week 1 or week 2, you spent a couple of days duck hunting.
I did.
So, we get a lot of folks that say, well, they don't even hunt. Well, I mean, obviously you're here for the passion as well.
I am. That's true. And I felt a little bad about that because
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought that up.
No, it's fine. I assume a new role in a leadership position and then take a week off to go duck hunting. And I thought, people are going to perceive that as like, look at it, he gets promoted and goes hunting.
Well, the other good story that just happened recently too is we have senior leadership meetings, and right now, new building and capacity, we have it at an off-site location, and your boss didn't even tell you where the meeting was because I was there when he called you the other day to come.
Well, he did, and to be fair, he did. I just had my time screwed up, unfortunately. But yeah, I think listening to what the wardens need, what they want, making their jobs safer, however that may be. There's a multitude of ways we can do that, whether it's equipment purchases, whether it's training, whether it's just what we require from them. If we can streamline those processes to make them more effective and safer, that's one of my driving forces. But I also think it's very important. It's always been mantra for me is that, I am not the smartest person in the room. But there are people in the room that are far smarter than me. And communicating your ideas is how we get better. As we move forward and come up with new initiatives and new strategies, we need to get a bottom-up discussion going. If there's a game warden out there that has an idea that might improve our operations, I want to hear it. I want to hear devices or methodologies that are going to make us more effective. And also at the same time, incorporating that into how we interact with our hunting public so that we can be more effective and we can be faster. It's incredible to me the amount of technology wardens use now. When I started, it was a piece of paper you wrote everything down on. Now they can scan a license and they can do all that high-end, high-speed stuff. But it only really works as long as you have cell service or something along those lines. And, we rolled out a new prosecution system recently, and, we've been struggling with the bugs. They're getting fixed. We're doing better. But, that's a perfect example of that communication because every Tuesday, one of the captains, Captain Sheets, sets up a meeting for the game wardens to teams in and say, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we fix it? And we've been chipping away at the problems. It's gotten better. But that's the type of mindset that really makes us effective. Our wardens are, as I said, they're incredibly well trained, very well equipped, and they're just a great group of people.
They are, and they work hard at their job every day. And I love what you said about technology. It's like any business out there. Like you're always learning. That's one thing that I love about the agency. We're always trying to do better for wildlife, for hunting, for outdoor recreation, for whatever that reason is. We're always trying to be as cutting edge as we can. Obviously, in the private world out there, some things can move a little faster, but I commend you on that. And, taking it from today, let's put it in reverse. And usually when we have an officer or a game warden on, we try to get some kind of story because game wardens have some great stories. And, I'd love to hear a throwback from you. And, especially you talked about your right out of the academy, went into special investigation. I don't want you to have to break my arms or anything after this is done, but if you have something you could share that pretty special. You did tell me one the other day. And
which one was that?
About meeting your wife. I mean, I thought that was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But, everybody has when you look at field notes in game news, most popular part of game news, people want to read about those stories. And every game warden I've ever met in my life has a good story, especially from a throwback. So if you could think of one that doesn't,
sure,
we would love to hear it.
I can go back to the one I told you the other day, and I think interestingly enough, when I started my career, I went into our special investigation. So that's essentially working in an undercover capacity, and I didn't look anything like I look today.
Did you have long hair?
Long hair. I was rocking the mullet. Had the big beard.
The mullet's back.
Braided. Yeah, that'll never go away.
Right.
So I had worked a case and for about 5 years, and got very close with the individuals. They were doing a lot of unlawful stuff, and we were building a case and getting lots and lots of charges. And when that case finally was adjudicated, when it was taken down, we ended up having around 22 individuals with 122 charges, something along that lines. And as far as I know, this has never happened before in the history of our agency, but that case, as the undercover operative, generally, those happen all across the Commonwealth. But in this particular scenario, I worked the investigation, we closed the investigation, and then I immediately transferred in as the field warden for that district. So I also prosecuted the case. And that was interesting because these are people that honestly, when you work in an undercover capacity, are they outlaws? They were violating the law, yes. Were they bad people? Not necessarily. But when you infiltrate with people like that, when you do a long-term investigation, it can be hurtful. It can hurt their feelings, and that cuts very deep. And here I am now living in the community with the folks that I had been, basically pulling a ruse on for the past 5 years. So needless to say, I was a little paranoid about that. And one of the individuals that I worked there was friendly with another person, and I'll get to that later. But I end up as a new district warden getting set up by my deputy on a blind date with this woman. And I come to find out that she, her brother is very good friends with one of the individuals that was involved in that investigation. And the whole time we're on the blind date, I'm thinking, is this a setup? Like, is she going to take me out into the woods and there's going to be a whole bunch of fellas waiting to beat the tar out of me? So I was a little paranoid initially, but it kind of worked out. We got married. So
dang sure worked out.
It worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
She wasn't setting me up. Maybe it was a long game. I'm not 100% sure.
That tells you how small the world can be. But again, we appreciate that. We appreciate everything you've done in your career, and we're excited to have you across the aisle from us here in Harrisburg and working together. When things need to go out there in the news, I can tell you that our constituents, our hunters and public are going to see your face more often when you have to talk to them. And it's one thing that we're trying to initiate is when it's a law enforcement issue to have, you in front of there to tell us what we're doing as an agency. And I think that's exciting. And is there anything that you want to tell the folks that are listening before we wrap it up? And it's been awesome. First of all, thank you for joining us this morning. I know you're busy, and I think this is great when we can get out in front of a lot of these issues.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
The folks that are out there listening, thanks for watching. The one takeaway from today's discussion is just basically, your game warden is a part of your community. Treat them as you would your neighbor, and they're there to help you. They're there to make you successful, and they're there to stop the people that want to cheat. And really, that's the takeaway.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And for folks out there, again, November, we're excited. It's that time of year. Be safe out there. Strap yourself in. And if you have any questions, always feel free to call us on our toll-free 833-PGC-HUNT, 833-PGC-WILD. You get our dispatch, obviously, if, you can look at OGT, Operation Game Thief. You can check that out on our website, get the numbers there. If you see something, you got to say something out there. Because again, like Rod said, wildlife we all are responsible for wildlife in this state. And, we all need to work together as much as possible. But thanks for tuning in to Call of the Outdoors, and best of luck to all of y'all out this fall. And we'll see you next time right here at the Pennsylvania Game Commission on Call of the Outdoors.